The music stopped for exactly 3 seconds, and in that silence, someone whispered her name like a challenge. Elena Whitmore felt the eyes on her before she heard the words. She turned, champagne glass still in hand, heart already sensing that something was about to change. "Do it," said Margaret Coleridge, her voice low and teasing, eyes bright with mischief, "or admit you're afraid of him." "Afraid of who?" Elena asked, though she already knew. Across the ballroom, standing apart from the swirling crowd like a stone pillar, untouched by wind, stood the Duke of Ashworth. He was not doing anything remarkable. He simply stood, drink untouched in his hand, watching the room with an expression that could freeze a fire. People orbited around him at a respectful distance, the way sailors avoid a reef they cannot see beneath calm water. "Everyone knows he hasn't smiled in 2 years," said Charlotte Bennington, fanning herself. "Not since his father died. Not since he became who he is now." "He's not cold," said Margaret. "He's ice itself. My cousin danced with him last season, and said he spoke 4 words the entire time." 4. Elena laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, the kind that covers uncertainty rather than joy. "And you want me to walk over there and do what, exactly?" "Charm him," Margaret said simply. "Make him smile. Make him laugh even. Just once. That's all." £20 says you can't. 30, Charlotte added, grinning. Elena looked at her friends, then back at the Duke, who at that exact moment turned his head slightly, as though he had felt the weight of attention pressing against him from across the room. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over the crowd and, for a fraction of a second, landed on Elena. She looked away first. He did not. "He's not someone to play games with," Elena said quietly. "It's not a game to hurt him," Margaret said, more gently now. "It's a game to prove you're not as shy as everyone thinks you are. You're always the clever one at these parties, Elena. The one with something sharp to say about everyone. Well, here's your chance to use that sharpness on the person nobody else dares to speak to." Elena thought of her father, at home, going over ledgers late into the night, with a face growing thinner by the week. She thought of the whispers that had started to follow her family since his investments failed, whispers she pretended not to hear at every gathering she attended. A little levity, a little proof that she could still hold her own in society, suddenly felt necessary in a way it hadn't a moment before. "Fine," she said, setting down her glass. "But if he turns me to stone with one look, you're both buying my funeral flowers." Her friends laughed, delighted, already turning to watch as Elena straightened her shoulders and began walking across the ballroom floor. The distance was not far, perhaps 30 steps, but it felt longer with every stride. The music had resumed, a lively waltz filling the air, yet the space around the Duke seemed to exist outside its rhythm, an island of quiet in a sea of sound. He noticed her approach before she reached him. Of course he did. Everyone noticed everything about him, and it seemed he had learned to notice everything in return, if only to protect himself from being caught unaware. "Your Grace," Elena said, offering a small curtsy when she reached him. "Miss Whitmore," he replied. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders that were obeyed without question. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "We haven't," she said. "I decided to correct that myself, since waiting for someone else to do it seemed like it might take another decade." Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite surprise, not quite amusement, something closer to interest, carefully restrained. "Bold," he said. "Practical," she corrected. "Life is short, Your Grace, and introductions are tedious. I find it easier to simply begin." "And what is it you're beginning tonight, Miss Whitmore?" She hesitated only a moment before deciding honesty, or a version close enough to it, was her best strategy. "A conversation, mostly. Possibly a small wager with my friends. I'm afraid I can't tell you which parts are true." To her astonishment, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, gone as quickly as it appeared. "A wager involving me, I assume." "You assume correctly," she said. "They dared me to speak with you. I believe the exact terms involved you smiling, though I suspect that's an impossibly high bar." "It usually is," he admitted. "I haven't had much reason to smile in quite some time." There was something in the way he said it, quiet and matter-of-fact, that made Elena pause. She had expected him to be offended, or dismissive, or simply cold, in the way everyone described. Instead, he seemed almost relieved to have someone speak to him directly, instead of tiptoeing around whatever tragedy had shaped him. "I won't pretend to know why," she said carefully. "But for what it's worth, I don't think a person needs a reason to smile. Sometimes it happens simply because something in front of them is amusing enough to deserve it. And do you consider yourself amusing, Miss Whitmore?" "Devastatingly so," she said, deadpan. This time, he did laugh. It was brief, almost surprised out of him, a short exhale of sound that seemed to catch even him off guard. He looked away for a moment, as though recalibrating, then looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "There," she said triumphantly, "I believe that settles my wager." "You wagered on my laughter," he said, "not my good opinion, I hope." "Your good opinion wasn't part of the terms," she said, "though I wouldn't turn it down if it were offered." He studied her for a long moment, the noise of the ballroom fading into background hum around them. "You're not like the others who approach me," he said finally. "No? Most people either avoid me entirely, or approach with such careful, practiced words that I can predict every sentence before they say it. You did neither." "I didn't practice anything," Elena admitted. "I simply walked over because my friends dared me to, and then I said whatever seemed true in the moment. I apologize if that was disrespectful." "It wasn't," he said. "It was refreshing." The music shifted into a new song, and across the room, Elena caught sight of Margaret and Charlotte watching with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. She felt a flush of embarrassment, aware suddenly of how this must look, the two of them standing close together, while half the ballroom pretended not to watch. "I should return to my friends," she said, "before they combust from curiosity." "Of course," he said, and there was something almost like reluctance in his voice, though she told herself she was imagining it. "Miss Whitmore, Your Grace." She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way across the room. When she reached Margaret and Charlotte, they descended on her immediately. "Well?" Margaret demanded. "Did you win?" "I believe I did," Elena said, still slightly stunned by her own success. He laughed. "Briefly. But it happened." "Impossible," Charlotte breathed. "Absolutely impossible." "What did you say to him?" "Nothing extraordinary," Elena said, though even as she spoke, she found herself replaying the conversation, turning over each word like a coin she wanted to examine more closely. "I simply spoke to him as though he were a person, rather than a legend everyone whispers about." "You spoke to the Duke of Ashworth as though he were a person," Margaret repeated slowly. "Elena, do you understand what you've just done? Nobody does that. Nobody has done that in 2 years." "He didn't seem to mind," Elena said. "He didn't seem to mind," Charlotte echoed, exchanging a look with Margaret that Elena couldn't quite interpret. "Elena, dear, I don't think you understand what just happened over there." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Margaret said slowly, "that the Duke of Ashworth just watched you walk away, and he hasn't stopped watching since." Elena resisted the urge to turn and look. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was simply curiosity on his part, the same curiosity anyone might feel after an unexpected conversation. But as the evening wore on, and she felt his gaze find her more than once across the crowded room, she began to wonder if she had won more than just a small wager that night. By the time her carriage arrived to take her home, the cool night air did little to calm the strange, restless energy humming beneath her skin. She thought of his laugh, brief and surprised, and wondered why a sound so small had left such a lasting impression. Her father was waiting up when she arrived home, as he often did now, unable to sleep with worry weighing on him like a stone. He looked up from his papers with tired eyes as she entered the small sitting room. "How was the ball, my dear?" "Interesting," Elena said, settling into the chair across from him. "I met the Duke of Ashworth tonight." Her father's eyebrows rose. "The one they call the Ice Duke? I've heard he speaks to no one." "He spoke to me," Elena said, and found herself smiling faintly at the memory. "Only briefly, but he spoke." "And what did you think of him?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "that everyone has decided who he is without actually asking him, and I think that must be a very lonely thing to live with." Her father studied her for a moment, something thoughtful passing behind his tired eyes. Be careful, Elena. Men like that carry burdens the rest of us can't see. Titles come with weight that crushes some men slowly, over years, until there's nothing left of who they used to be. I only spoke with him for a few minutes, Father. It was a dare, nothing more. Of course, her father said, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, be careful. Elena said goodnight and retired to her room. But sleep came slowly that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over, searching for some detail she might have missed, some clue to the man behind the cold reputation. She did not know, as she finally drifted into sleep, that across the city, in a grand house far larger and far colder than her own modest home, the Duke of Ashworth sat alone by a dying fire, thinking of a woman who had dared to speak to him as though he were simply a man, and nothing more. He had forgotten what that felt like. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of her mother's voice carrying up the stairs, unusually animated for such an early hour. She dressed quickly and made her way down to find her mother clutching a letter, her face flushed with excitement and confusion in equal measure. Elena, her mother said, holding out the letter. This arrived for you not 10 minutes ago. It bears the seal of the Duke of Ashworth. Elena's hands were unsteady as she took the letter, breaking the wax seal with careful fingers. The handwriting inside was precise, controlled, exactly as she might have expected from a man who chose his words as carefully as he chose his silences. Miss Whitmore, the letter began, I find myself in need of a favor, and I believe you may be the only person capable of granting it. I would be grateful if you could call upon me at your earliest convenience, at an hour that suits you. There is a matter I wish to discuss, one that requires the same directness you displayed last evening. I remain, respectfully, Ashworth. Elena read the letter 3 times before she trusted herself to speak. Well, her mother pressed. What does it say? He wants to see me again, Elena said quietly, still staring at the elegant, controlled handwriting, as though it might reveal some hidden meaning if she looked long enough. He says he needs a favor. A favor, her mother repeated, eyes widening. From you? What sort of favor could the Duke of Ashworth possibly need from you? Elena had no answer. But as she folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket, she felt something stir inside her, a mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation that she could not name, and was not entirely sure she wanted to. Whatever this favor was, she suspected her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. Elena stood outside the tall iron gates of Ashworth House for a full minute before she found the courage to walk through them. The building loomed above her, grand and imposing, its stone walls dark with age, its windows tall and narrow like watchful eyes. She had passed this house many times before, always from a distance, always wondering what kind of man lived behind those cold walls. Now she was about to find out. A servant led her through a long corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, each one seeming to judge her with painted eyes. She tried not to look at them too closely, unsettled by how many of them shared the same sharp jaw and distant expression as the man she had spoken with the night before. The servant stopped before a set of heavy oak doors and knocked twice. Enter, came the voice from within, familiar now, low and controlled. The doors opened into a study, filled with books from floor to ceiling, a fire crackling in a wide stone hearth, and behind a large desk, the Duke of Ashworth, standing as she entered, his expression unreadable as always. Miss Whitmore, he said, thank you for coming. Your letter left me little choice, Your Grace, Elena said, offering a small curtsy. Curiosity is a powerful motivator. I imagine it is. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Please, sit. Elena sat, smoothing her skirts, watching as he took the chair across from her, rather than retreating behind his desk, a small gesture that struck her as oddly considerate for a man with such a fearsome reputation. I won't waste your time with unnecessary preamble, he said. I have a proposal for you, and I would like you to hear it fully before you respond. I'm listening, Elena said. You may have noticed, he began, that I am not well liked in society. Not disliked, precisely, but avoided. Feared, perhaps, though I've never understood why silence should be so terrifying to people who fill every room with noise. Silence unsettles people who don't know what to do with it, Elena said. They mistake it for judgment. Perhaps, he said. Regardless, my reputation has become something of a burden. It affects my business dealings, my standing among peers, even matters as simple as securing invitations to events where important conversations take place. People avoid me, and in avoiding me, they avoid opportunities that might benefit us both. I still don't understand what this has to do with me, Elena said. Last night, he continued. For the first time in longer than I care to admit, someone spoke to me without fear, without flattery, and without an agenda I could see through in the first sentence. You made me laugh, Miss Whitmore. That may seem a small thing to you, but I assure you, it is not small to me. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or something closer to pride. I'm glad to have been of service, Your Grace, though I still fail to see the favor you require. I would like you to do it again, he said simply, not once, but repeatedly. I would like you to accompany me to social functions, to engage with me as you did last night, to help soften the impression I've cultivated, intentionally or not, over the past 2 years. Elena blinked, certain she had misheard him. You want me to pretend to be charmed by you at parties? I want you to be exactly as you were last night, he said. Direct, unafraid. If that happens to charm people into seeing me differently, all the better. In exchange, I am prepared to offer something in return, something I believe would be of significant value to your family. Elena's breath caught. What do you mean?
I am aware of your father's recent financial difficulties, the Duke said, his voice gentle now, careful, as though he understood the sensitivity of the subject.
I am aware that certain investments failed, and that your family's standing in society has suffered as a result. I have connections, resources, and influence that could help restore what has been lost, quietly and without drawing further attention to the matter. Elena stared at him, torn between gratitude and pride, unwilling to accept charity, dressed up as a business arrangement, yet unable to deny how desperately her family needed exactly what he was offering. Why would you do this for me? She asked quietly. You barely know me. Because you are the only person in 2 years who has treated me like a man rather than a title, he said, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his controlled expression before he mastered it again. Consider it a fair trade, Miss Whitmore. Nothing more. Elena sat quietly for a long moment, weighing his words, weighing her own uncertainty. The offer was generous, almost too generous, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface of his request than he was willing to admit. I need time to consider, she said finally. Of course, he said. Take whatever time you need. She rose to leave, but paused at the door, turning back to look at him one final time. Your Grace, may I ask you something? You may. Why did you truly stop smiling? 2 years ago, my friend said. What happened? His expression closed like a door swinging shut, controlled and distant once more. That, he said quietly, is a story for another day, Miss Whitmore. If you accept my proposal, perhaps you'll learn it eventually. Elena nodded, understanding she had touched something private, something not yet ready to be shared. She left the study and made her way home, her mind spinning with possibilities, her heart caught somewhere between caution and an emotion she didn't yet dare to name. That evening, she discussed the proposal with her parents, watching relief flood her father's tired face as she explained the arrangement. Her mother, ever practical, asked pointed questions about propriety and appearances, wanting assurance that Elena's reputation would remain untouched throughout the arrangement. It is simply a business matter, Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she wondered if she entirely believed them. I accompany him to events. In exchange, our family's situation improves. There is nothing more to it than that. Her father studied her carefully. Elena, are you certain this is wise? I'm certain it's necessary, she said. Whether it is wise remains to be seen. 3 days later, Elena sent her response to Ashworth House, a single line agreeing to his proposal, and a request that they discuss the specific terms of their arrangement at his earliest convenience. The response came swiftly, inviting her to call the following afternoon. When she arrived, she found him waiting in the same study, though this time he seemed less guarded, less like a man bracing for rejection. and more like someone cautiously hopeful. "You've decided to accept," he said. "I have," Elena confirmed. "Though I have conditions of my own." "Name them." "First," she said, "I will not pretend affection I don't feel. If I engage with you warmly at these events, it will be because something in the moment genuinely earns that warmth, not because I am performing a role you've assigned me." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "Second," she continued, "you will treat me as an equal in this arrangement, not as a hired performer. I am doing this to help my family, not to be commanded." "You have my word," he said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it completely. "Third," Elena said, softer now, "if there comes a day when this arrangement no longer serves either of us, we end it honestly, without games or excuses." The Duke considered her words carefully before responding. "I accept all three conditions, Miss Whitmore, and I would add one of my own, if you'll permit it." "Go on?" "Call me by my name," he said. "Not Your Grace, not Duke. My name is Julian. I would like, at least between us, to be simply Julian." Elena felt something shift in her chest at the request, small but significant, a crack in the careful distance he maintained with everyone else. "Julian," she repeated softly. "Very well, and you may call me Elena." "Elena," he said, testing the name as though tasting something unfamiliar and finding it pleasant. "Then we have an arrangement." "We have an arrangement," she agreed. They spent the next hour discussing practical details, which events they would attend together, how their acquaintance would be explained to curious onlookers, what boundaries would remain firmly in place throughout their arrangement. Elena found herself surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them once the formal negotiations concluded, how Julian's dry humor emerged more readily than she expected, how his laughter, though still rare, came more easily each time she teased him about his notorious reputation. As she prepared to leave that afternoon, Julian walked her to the door himself, an unusual gesture she suspected he rarely extended to anyone. "Elena," he said, as she stepped through the doorway, "thank you for agreeing to this, and for speaking to me honestly, rather than simply telling me what you thought I wanted to hear." "I don't know how to do anything else, Julian," she said with a small smile. "I'm afraid you're stuck with my honesty for the duration of our arrangement." "I find," he said quietly, "that I don't mind that at all." As her carriage pulled away from Ashworth House, Elena glanced back to see Julian still standing in the doorway, watching her departure with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. She told herself the fluttering sensation in her chest was simply nervous anticipation about the arrangement ahead, nothing more. But some quiet part of her already suspected otherwise. Word of Elena's connection to the Duke of Ashworth spread through society faster than either of them anticipated. By the time she attended her next event, an evening gathering hosted by Lord Pemberton, whispers followed her from room to room, curious eyes tracking her every movement. "Is it true?" Charlotte asked, pulling Elena aside, almost the moment she arrived. "Is it true you've been calling on the Duke?" "We have a business arrangement," Elena said carefully, aware of how thin that explanation sounded even to her own ears. "A business arrangement," Margaret repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Elena, darling, nobody has a business arrangement with the Duke of Ashworth. People have terror, admiration, or complete avoidance. Nothing in between." "Well, now there's something in between," Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "He requires assistance restoring his social standing. I'm assisting him. That's all there is to it." Her friends exchanged a skeptical glance, but said nothing further, though Elena caught them watching her closely throughout the evening, waiting to see if the rumors held any truth. She didn't have to wait long. Julian arrived an hour into the gathering, and the room shifted the moment he entered, conversations quieting, eyes turning toward the doorway where he stood, tall and composed, scanning the crowd until his gaze found Elena across the room. He crossed the distance between them without hesitation, ignoring the surprised murmurs that followed his path. "Miss Whitmore," he said, offering a small bow. "Your Grace," she replied, matching his formality with a hint of playfulness in her eyes. "I wasn't certain you would attend tonight." "I wasn't certain either until I learned you would be here," he admitted quietly, quiet enough that only she could hear. The comment sent a small thrill through her chest, one she quickly suppressed, reminding herself firmly that their arrangement was practical, nothing more. She offered her arm, and together they moved through the crowded room, Julian's presence beside her drawing attention from every direction. At first, their interactions felt stilted, almost rehearsed, each of them acutely aware of the eyes watching their every gesture. Elena asked polite questions about his estate, his interests, careful topics designed to showcase easy conversation without revealing anything too personal. Julian answered dutifully, his responses measured, controlled, though she caught glimpses of genuine engagement beneath the careful surface. "You're doing well," she murmured to him during a brief pause, as they stood near the refreshment table. "3 separate people have commented on how relaxed you seem tonight." "I don't feel particularly relaxed," Julian admitted. "I feel as though I'm walking through unfamiliar territory with no map to guide me." "That makes 2 of us," Elena said honestly. "Perhaps we should simply stop performing and speak as we did in your study. That felt considerably more natural than this." Julian considered her suggestion, something like relief passing across his features. "What would you like to discuss then, if not the weather or my estate's crop yields?" "Tell me something true," Elena said, "something you wouldn't tell anyone else in this room." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her carefully, as though weighing whether she deserved such trust. "I find these gatherings exhausting," he said finally, "not because the people are unpleasant, though many are, but because I've forgotten how to exist in rooms like this without feeling like an actor, performing a role written by someone else entirely." "What role were you given?" Elena asked softly. "The cold, unfeeling Duke," he said, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "The man who inherited too young, who buried his father and mother within the same difficult year, who learned that grief displayed publicly becomes gossip, while grief hidden becomes strength. So I hid it, and somewhere along the way, hiding became simply who I am." Elena's chest tightened at his words, the casual way he mentioned losing both parents within the same year, burying his emotions so thoroughly that even he seemed uncertain where the performance ended and the real man began. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That sounds unbearably lonely." "It was," he said. "It is, most days, though tonight feels different." "Because of our arrangement?" "Because of you," he corrected gently. "The arrangement was simply the excuse I needed to ask." Elena's breath caught at his admission, direct and unguarded in a way that surprised her. Before she could formulate a response, Lord Pemberton approached, drawing Julian into conversation about matters of business, and the moment passed, though its warmth lingered in Elena's chest for the remainder of the evening. As the night wore on, Elena noticed something shifting in how others approached Julian. Emboldened by his visible ease with her, several guests, who had previously avoided him, found the courage to engage him in conversation, testing the waters cautiously at first, then more confidently, as he responded with genuine, if measured, warmth. "You've done something remarkable tonight," Lord Pemberton commented to Elena later, as they stood near the dance floor, watching Julian in conversation with a group of gentlemen discussing trade routes. "I haven't seen the Duke engage so freely in years." "He simply needed someone willing to speak plainly with him," Elena said. "Once people stop treating him like a monument, he becomes considerably easier to know." "Perhaps," Lord Pemberton said thoughtfully, "though I suspect it's not simply your plain speaking that has changed him, Miss Whitmore." Elena chose not to respond to the implication in his words, though she felt its weight settle uncomfortably in her chest. Later that evening, as guests began departing, Julian found Elena near the entrance hall, offering to escort her to her carriage. The night air was cool and crisp, stars scattered across a clear sky above them as they walked slowly toward the waiting carriages. "Thank you," Julian said, as they reached her carriage. "Tonight was considerably easier than I anticipated." "You did the difficult work yourself," Elena said. "I simply gave you an excuse to try." "I don't think that's entirely true," he said, "but I won't argue the point tonight." He helped her into the carriage, his hand lingering briefly against hers, longer than necessary before releasing it. Elena felt warmth spread through her fingers, where his hand had touched hers. An unfamiliar sensation she couldn't quite explain away as simple courtesy. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Lady Ashcombe's garden party, I believe." "I'll be counting the days," Julian said, and though his tone remained measured, something in his eyes suggested he meant the words more sincerely than casual politeness required. As the carriage pulled away, Elena watched him through the window until he disappeared from view, his tall figure standing alone in the darkness outside Pemberton House, watching her departure with the same quiet intensity he'd shown all evening. The following days brought a flurry of activity, as word of Elena's growing acquaintance with the Duke spread further through society's circles. Invitations that had previously overlooked her family began arriving with unusual frequency. Hostesses suddenly eager to include the young woman, rumored to have thawed the Ice Duke's legendary reserve. Her father noticed the change first, remarking one evening over dinner how several previously distant business associates had suddenly become considerably more amenable to discussing potential partnerships. "It seems your friendship with the Duke carries more influence than either of us anticipated," he said, pride and gratitude mixing in his tired voice. "It's simply an arrangement, Father," Elena reminded him, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time she spoke them. "Of course," he said, though his knowing smile suggested he understood something Elena herself was only beginning to recognize. That night, alone in her room, Elena found herself replaying moments from the evening at Pemberton House, particularly the quiet conversation near the refreshment table, when Julian had spoken so openly about his grief and isolation. She thought of the warmth in his eyes when he admitted their arrangement was simply an excuse to be near her, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Something that felt considerably more significant than the practical business arrangement she'd agreed to weeks earlier. She told herself she was imagining complications where none existed, that gratitude and curiosity were simply natural responses to unexpected kindness from an unexpected source. But as she drifted toward sleep that night, it was Julian's quiet voice she heard in her thoughts, his admission that she made him feel less alone, and she found herself hoping, despite every practical instinct urging caution, that their next meeting would arrive quickly. Across the city, in his grand and lonely house, Julian sat awake long into the night, staring into the dying embers of his fire, thinking of a woman whose honesty had cracked open something he'd kept sealed for 2 long years, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in allowing himself to hope again, or if he had simply, finally, found his way back toward the man he used to be, before grief had taught him to disappear. Lady Ashcomb's garden party unfolded beneath a sky so blue it seemed almost painted, rows of colorful flowers stretching across manicured lawns, while guests strolled leisurely between refreshment tables laden with delicate pastries. Elena arrived early, eager despite herself, and found Julian already present, standing near a rose arbor in quiet conversation with an elderly gentleman she didn't recognize. He excused himself the moment he noticed her, crossing the lawn with purposeful strides that drew several curious glances from nearby guests. "You came early," he observed, a note of pleased surprise coloring his voice. "I couldn't help myself," Elena admitted. "Gardens in full bloom are one of my few genuine weaknesses." "Then perhaps you'd allow me to show you Lady Ashcomb's prized collection of climbing roses," Julian offered. "I understand they're considered quite exceptional, though I confess, I know little about flowers myself." "A guided tour by someone who knows nothing about the subject," Elena teased. "How delightfully unhelpful." "I never claimed to be helpful," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in something dangerously close to a genuine smile. "Only willing." They walked together through the gardens, weaving between hedgerows and flower beds while their earlier stiffness continued to soften into something more comfortable, more natural. Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, delighting in Julian's dry observations about the various guests they passed, his wit sharper and more entertaining than she had initially given him credit for. "You've been holding back," she accused, as they paused beside a fountain trickling softly nearby. "All this time, everyone believed you incapable of humor, and here you are, thoroughly entertaining." "I've had little practice," Julian admitted. "Humor requires an audience willing to laugh, rather than simply nod politely out of fear. You're the first person in years who laughs because something is genuinely amusing, rather than because you believe you must." "I could never laugh out of obligation," Elena said. "It would show terribly on my face. I have a rather transparent expression, I'm told." "I've noticed," Julian said softly, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that sent warmth creeping up her neck. "It's one of the things I find most reassuring about spending time with you. I never have to guess what you're truly thinking." They continued their walk, and gradually, their conversation deepened, beyond playful teasing, into something more substantial. Julian spoke, hesitantly at first, about his childhood, memories of his father teaching him to ride, before illness claimed him too early, of his mother's gentle laughter filling rooms that now sat perpetually silent. "I used to love this house," he admitted, though he wasn't referring to Lady Ashcombe's estate, but rather his own grand and lonely home. "Now it feels more like a museum I'm forced to maintain, rather than somewhere I actually live." "Perhaps it simply needs more life brought into it," Elena suggested gently. "Perhaps it's not the house that changed, but rather the silence that filled it after your parents were gone." Julian was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "You may be right," he said finally, "though I confess, silence has felt safer than the alternative these past 2 years." "Safer how?" "If I fill the silence with laughter, with warmth, with genuine connection," he said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care, "then I risk losing that too, eventually. Everyone I've loved has been taken from me far too quickly. It seemed easier to simply stop loving anything at all, rather than risk that particular grief again." Elena's chest tightened at his admission, understanding suddenly the depth of loneliness he had chosen to endure, rather than risk further heartbreak. "That sounds like an unbearably difficult way to live," she said softly. "It is," he agreed. "Though lately, I find myself questioning whether it's truly the safer path, or simply the path of least resistance, disguised as wisdom." Before Elena could respond, they were interrupted by Lady Ashcombe herself, insisting they join the other guests for refreshments before the afternoon grew too warm. The moment passed, though its intimacy lingered between them for the remainder of the gathering, evident in stolen glances and quiet smiles exchanged across crowded tables. As the party progressed, Elena watched with quiet satisfaction as Julian engaged more freely with other guests, his conversations lasting longer, his laughter emerging more readily, each time someone offered genuine wit rather than nervous flattery. Several gentlemen who had previously avoided him now sought his opinion on matters of business and politics, treating him as a valued peer rather than a distant, unapproachable figure.
"You've worked wonders," Charlotte whispered to Elena later, watching Julian in animated conversation with a group near the fountain.
"I scarcely recognize him. He simply needed people willing to see past the reputation," Elena said, though privately, she suspected the transformation involved more than simple social encouragement. Something deeper was shifting within Julian, a gradual thawing that seemed connected specifically to their growing friendship, rather than any general social strategy. As the afternoon wore into evening, guests began departing gradually, carriages arriving in steady succession to collect them. Julian found Elena near the garden's entrance, offering once again to escort her to her waiting carriage. "Thank you for today," he said, as they walked slowly through the fading golden light. "I haven't enjoyed a social gathering this thoroughly, in longer than I care to admit." "The pleasure was mine as well," Elena said honestly. "Though I confess, our conversations have grown considerably more personal than I anticipated when we first discussed this arrangement. Does that trouble you?" Julian asked, a note of genuine concern entering his voice. "No," Elena said, surprising herself with her own honesty. "It doesn't trouble me at all. I find myself looking forward to these conversations more than I probably should, given the practical nature of our agreement." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Elena," he said quietly, "I must confess something, and I hope you'll forgive my directness." "Please," she said, her heart suddenly racing. "This arrangement began as a practical solution to a practical problem," he said. "But somewhere between our first conversation and today, it stopped feeling practical entirely. I find myself thinking of you constantly, counting the days until our next meeting, with an eagerness that has nothing to do with restoring my social standing." Elena's breath caught, her mind racing to process his admission, even as her heart responded with immediate, undeniable warmth. "Julian," she began, uncertain how to respond to such unexpected honesty. "I don't expect you to share these feelings," he continued quickly, misreading her hesitation. "I simply thought you deserved honesty, given everything you've offered me these past weeks." "Julian," she said again, more firmly this time, reaching out to touch his arm gently. "I haven't finished thinking, that's all. Give me a moment to catch up with my own heart." He fell silent, watching her carefully, waiting with an expression that revealed more vulnerability than she had ever witnessed from the supposedly cold, unfeeling Duke society believed him to be. "I think," Elena said slowly, "that I've been telling myself this is simply friendship, simply gratitude for your generosity toward my family. But standing here now, I'm no longer certain that's entirely true." Something shifted in Julian's expression, hope replacing the careful guardedness he usually maintained. "What are you saying, Elena?" "I'm saying," she said, "that I look forward to seeing you more than any practical arrangement should require. I think about our conversations long after they've ended. I find myself wondering what you're thinking, what you're feeling, in moments when we're not together." Julian reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the fading golden light, the weight of unspoken feelings settling comfortably between them for the first time. "This complicates things considerably," Julian said finally, though his voice carried none of the concern his words suggested. "It does," Elena agreed, smiling despite herself, "though I find I don't mind the complication nearly as much as I probably should." "Nor do I," Julian admitted. They stood together a moment longer before Elena's carriage arrived, the practical world intruding once again on their private moment. Julian helped her inside, his hand lingering against hers, exactly as it had the week before, though this time neither of them pretended the touch was simply courtesy. "Until next time," he said softly. "Until next time," Elena echoed, and as her carriage pulled away, she watched him standing alone in the garden's fading light, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever had begun as a simple dare weeks earlier had transformed into something considerably more significant, something neither of them had anticipated, yet something neither of them seemed inclined to resist any longer. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to Elena and Julian's growing relationship that neither of them had experienced before, a comfortable pattern of shared afternoons, quiet conversations, and gradual discovery of each other's hidden depths. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something neither of them spoke of openly, yet both understood clearly whenever their eyes met across crowded rooms. Their public appearances continued, though the pretense of performance had long since fallen away, replaced by genuine ease that society noticed and remarked upon with increasing curiosity. Julian's transformation became the subject of considerable gossip throughout the ton, hostesses eagerly seeking his attendance at their gatherings, gentlemen who had once avoided him, now competing for his attention at private clubs and business meetings. Elena's family, too, felt the positive effects of the arrangement. Her father's business connections improved steadily, old associates suddenly willing to extend the trust and cooperation they had withdrawn following his financial difficulties. Whispers about the family's tarnished reputation faded, replaced instead by curious speculation about Elena's growing closeness with the Duke of Ashworth. "People are beginning to talk," her mother mentioned one evening, watching Elena prepare for another gathering with unusual care. Not unkindly, mind you, but with considerable interest in where this arrangement might lead. "It's simply an arrangement, Mother," Elena said, though the words felt increasingly false each time she spoke them. "Elena, dear," her mother said gently, "I've watched you prepare for tonight's gathering, with more attention to your appearance than I've seen in years. I don't think this is simply an arrangement any longer, whatever you might tell yourself." Elena said nothing, though her silence spoke volumes. Her mother seemed to understand perfectly. That evening's gathering, hosted by the Countess of Radcliffe, brought Elena and Julian together once again, their now familiar routine of quiet conversation and shared laughter unfolding naturally amid the elegant surroundings. As the evening progressed, Julian drew her aside toward a quiet alcove, away from the crowded main hall. "I want to show you something," he said, producing a small, carefully wrapped package from inside his coat. "Julian, you didn't need to bring me anything," Elena protested, though curiosity got the better of her as she accepted the small parcel. Inside, she found a delicate silver locket, simple yet elegant, engraved with a small pattern of climbing roses, similar to those they had admired together at Lady Ashcombe's garden party. "It reminded me of that afternoon," Julian explained, watching her expression carefully. "The day everything between us began to feel considerably less like an arrangement, and considerably more like something I wasn't prepared to lose." "Julian," Elena breathed, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gesture. "This is beautiful." "Open it," he urged gently. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the small locket, finding inside a tiny, carefully painted miniature portrait of a rose garden, rendered with remarkable detail despite its small size. "I commissioned it specially," Julian admitted. "I wanted you to have something that reminded you of that day, whenever we're apart." "Thank you," Elena said softly, closing her fingers around the small locket. "I'll treasure it." Julian helped fasten the delicate chain around her neck, his fingers brushing gently against her skin as he secured the clasp. When he finished, he didn't step back immediately, remaining close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the careful restraint in his eyes as he studied her face. "Elena," he said quietly, "I know we agreed to honesty between us from the beginning of this arrangement. So allow me to be honest now. I find myself caring for you more deeply with each passing day. What began as gratitude for your kindness has become something considerably more significant." "I feel the same way," Elena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Though I confess, this frightens me somewhat. Our arrangement began under such unusual circumstances, I hardly know how to navigate what's developing between us now." "We don't need to navigate anything tonight," Julian said gently. "We simply need to acknowledge what exists and allow it to unfold naturally, without forcing false timelines or unnecessary complications." "That sounds wise," Elena said, smiling despite her nervousness, "though I suspect wisdom has little to do with matters of the heart." "Perhaps not," Julian agreed, his own smile warming his typically guarded expression. "But I find myself willing to risk uncertainty, if it means continuing to know you, as I have these past weeks." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the Countess of Radcliffe, who approached with obvious curiosity, eager to learn more about the growing friendship that had become the talk of every social gathering throughout the season. "Your Grace," the Countess said, "Miss Whitmore, I do hope you'll join us for the evening's musical performance. I understand a rather talented young violinist has been engaged for tonight's entertainment." "We'd be delighted," Julian said, offering Elena his arm as they followed the Countess toward the main gathering hall. The musical performance proved genuinely enjoyable, the young violinist's skill impressive enough to hold the entire room's attention throughout an extended program of classical pieces. Elena found herself stealing glances at Julian throughout the performance, noting the way he seemed genuinely absorbed in the music, a small, contented smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Afterward, as guests began mingling once again, Elena's friends approached, their curiosity about Elena's new locket impossible to contain. "That's beautiful," Margaret exclaimed, examining the delicate silver piece around Elena's neck. "Wherever did you get it?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as she glanced toward Julian, who watched the exchange with quiet amusement. "It was a gift," she said simply. "From the Duke, I presume," Charlotte said knowingly, exchanging a meaningful look with Margaret. "Elena, this arrangement of yours has clearly evolved into something considerably more interesting than a simple business matter." "Perhaps it has," Elena admitted, unable to suppress her own smile any longer. Her friends squealed with delighted excitement, immediately peppering her with questions about the nature of their growing relationship, questions Elena found herself answering with unexpected honesty and warmth. The pretense of their original arrangement had clearly fallen away entirely, replaced by something genuine that neither Elena nor Julian seemed inclined to hide any longer. As the evening drew to a close, Julian once again escorted Elena to her waiting carriage, the familiar routine now carrying an additional weight of unspoken affection between them. "Elena," Julian said, as they paused beside the carriage, "would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the Harrington Ball next week, not simply as part of our arrangement, but as my genuine companion for the evening?" "I would be delighted," Elena said, her heart swelling with happiness at his careful, sincere invitation. "Then I shall count the days," Julian said, echoing his earlier sentiment from weeks before, though this time, the words carried considerably more weight and meaning behind them. As her carriage pulled away, Elena touched the delicate locket resting against her chest, feeling the warmth of Julian's thoughtful gift and the growing certainty that whatever future awaited them, it promised to be considerably more meaningful than either of them had anticipated when their unusual arrangement first began weeks earlier. Back at Ashworth House, Julian retired to his study, settling into his familiar chair beside the fire. Though tonight, the silence that usually surrounded him felt considerably less oppressive than it had in years past. He thought of Elena's warm smile, her genuine laughter, the way she seemed to understand him in ways no one else had bothered to attempt since his parents' passing. For the first time in 2 long years, Julian allowed himself to hope for something beyond simple survival, beyond the careful, guarded existence he had constructed to protect himself from further grief. He hoped, instead, for genuine happiness, for a future that included warmth and laughter and connection, all embodied in the remarkable young woman who had walked boldly into his life on nothing more than a dare, and had somehow, gradually, become considerably more important to him than he ever could have anticipated. The Harrington Ball arrived amid unusually cold weather for the season, frost gathering on window panes throughout the city as carriages rolled steadily toward the grand estate on the outskirts of town. Elena dressed with particular care that evening, choosing a deep blue gown that complemented the silver locket resting against her collarbone, a small reminder of the promise growing steadily between herself and Julian. When she arrived, she found him waiting near the entrance, his expression brightening the moment he caught sight of her descending from her carriage. "You look remarkable," he said, offering his arm as she approached. "You're not so bad yourself," Elena teased, accepting his arm and feeling the familiar warmth that now accompanied their every meeting. They entered the ballroom together, and Elena noticed immediately how differently people responded to Julian's presence now, compared to that first evening, months earlier. Where once guests had parted around him with careful, nervous distance, now several approached directly, engaging him in easy conversation, treating him as a welcome addition to their gathering, rather than a figure to be cautiously avoided. "You've truly transformed his reputation," Lady Harrington remarked to Elena during a quiet moment near the refreshment tables. "I remember when guests would practically flee the room if the Duke entered unexpectedly. Now everyone seeks his company." "He was always capable of warmth," Elena said. "People simply needed to see past their assumptions. And you were the one brave enough to look past them first," Lady Harrington said with a knowing smile. "The entire ton speaks of little else these days, my dear. Everyone wonders when an announcement might follow, given how devoted you two have clearly become." Elena felt her cheeks warm at the implication, though she found herself unable to deny the truth behind Lady Harrington's words any longer. Whatever had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something considerably deeper, a connection both she and Julian openly acknowledged whenever they found themselves alone together. As the evening progressed, however, Elena noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere surrounding them. Certain guests, previously friendly and welcoming, now regarded her with cooler, more calculating expressions. She overheard fragments of conversation as she passed groups of gathered guests, whispers that carried a distinctly less charitable tone than the warm speculation she had grown accustomed to. "Surely she's simply after his fortune," one voice murmured as Elena passed. "Her family's difficulties are well known throughout society." "The Duke deserves someone of proper standing," another voice added. "Not a girl whose father nearly bankrupted their entire family through poor investments." Elena's steps faltered slightly, the cruel words landing with unexpected force despite her attempts to maintain composure. She continued walking, forcing her expression to remain neutral, though the comments lingered uncomfortably in her thoughts for the remainder of the evening. Julian noticed her distraction almost immediately, drawing her gently aside during a lull in the evening's festivities. "Elena, what's troubling you?" he asked, concern evident in his careful tone. "It's nothing," she said, attempting a reassuring smile that felt hollow even to herself. "Elena," Julian said firmly, "we agreed to honesty between us from the very beginning. Please, tell me what's wrong." She hesitated only a moment longer before relaying the overheard conversation, watching Julian's expression harden with barely contained anger as she repeated the cruel words. "Those comments are entirely unfounded," Julian said firmly. "Anyone who suggests you're motivated by fortune clearly doesn't know you at all." "I know that," Elena said, "but it still troubles me, Julian. I worry that our growing closeness might damage your reputation rather than help it. That people will believe I'm simply using our arrangement to elevate my family's fortunes rather than genuine affection." "Let them believe whatever they wish," Julian said, taking her hands gently in his own. I know the truth of your heart, Elena, and that's what matters most to me. Society's opinions have never dictated my choices, and I refuse to allow them to dictate this one either. Elena felt reassured by his firm conviction, though a small kernel of worry remained lodged in her chest throughout the remainder of the evening. She noticed several more pointed glances directed her way, murmured conversations that quieted abruptly whenever she approached, and though Julian remained steadfastly by her side throughout the gathering, she couldn't entirely shake the uncomfortable sensation that their happiness had drawn unwelcome scrutiny from certain corners of society. Later that evening, as the ball wound toward its conclusion, Elena found herself briefly alone near a quiet corner of the terrace, seeking a moment's respite from the crowded ballroom and its increasingly uncomfortable undercurrents. She hadn't noticed Lady Beaumont approaching until the older woman's voice broke the silence beside her. "Miss Whitmore," Lady Beaumont said, her tone carrying an edge of false pleasantness that immediately put Elena on guard. "I do hope you understand the position you've placed the Duke in, pursuing him so publicly, given your family's rather unfortunate circumstances." "I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Lady Beaumont," Elena said carefully, though she suspected exactly where this conversation was heading. "Simply that some of us find it rather convenient how quickly your family's fortunes have improved since you began this curious arrangement with His Grace," Lady Beaumont continued, her smile sharp despite its polite veneer. "One does wonder about your true motivations, given how desperately your father needed assistance before this friendship conveniently blossomed." Elena felt anger rising within her chest, though she forced herself to respond with measured calm. "My feelings for the Duke have nothing to do with my family's circumstances, Lady Beaumont. I would think you'd understand that genuine affection doesn't require financial motivation to exist." "Perhaps," Lady Beaumont said, though her tone suggested she remained entirely unconvinced. "Though I do wonder how the Duke would feel, learning that certain members of society question whether his affections are genuinely returned, or simply exploited, for their considerable benefits." Before Elena could formulate a suitable response, Julian's voice cut through the tense exchange, firm and unmistakably protective. "Lady Beaumont," he said, stepping onto the terrace with an expression Elena had never witnessed before, cold and controlled, in a manner that reminded her uncomfortably of the distant Duke he had once been, before their friendship began. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Miss Whitmore." Lady Beaumont's expression flickered briefly with alarm, before settling into practiced composure. "Your Grace, I was simply expressing concern for your well-being, given the unusual circumstances of your friendship with Miss Whitmore." "My well-being has never been better cared for than it has been these past several months," Julian said firmly, "precisely because of Miss Whitmore's genuine friendship and affection. I would ask that you refrain from spreading unfounded speculation about her character in the future." Lady Beaumont's face reddened slightly at the pointed rebuke, though she offered a stiff curtsy before retreating quickly back toward the main ballroom, leaving Elena and Julian alone on the quiet terrace. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," Julian said, turning to face Elena with genuine concern etched across his features. "It's not your fault," Elena said, though she couldn't entirely suppress the lingering hurt from Lady Beaumont's cruel implications. "I simply worry that these rumors will continue, regardless of how firmly we deny them." "Let them continue," Julian said, reaching out to gently tuck a loose strand of hair behind Elena's ear. "I know the truth, and that's what matters most. Society's cruel speculation has never controlled my decisions, and I refuse to allow it to control this one, no matter how many Lady Beaumonts attempt to interfere." Elena felt comforted by his steadfast reassurance, though as they returned together to the crowded ballroom, she couldn't entirely shake the uneasy feeling that Lady Beaumont's cruel words represented merely the beginning of challenges that awaited them both in the weeks ahead. In the days following the Harrington Ball, whispers about Elena's motivations continued circulating through society with increasing intensity, each retelling adding new, more elaborate details to what had originally been simply speculative gossip. Elena found herself increasingly reluctant to attend social gatherings, dreading the pointed glances and hushed conversations that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. "You mustn't let them affect you," her mother counseled one afternoon, noticing Elena's growing hesitance to leave the house. "Cruel gossip fades quickly enough once a new subject captures society's attention." I know that, Mother, Elena said, though the words offered little genuine comfort. But I worry that this particular gossip won't fade quickly, given how closely it involves the Duke. And I worry, too, about how it might affect him, being associated so publicly with someone whose motives are constantly questioned. Her mother studied her carefully. Elena, do you truly care for this man, or has this arrangement simply become complicated by circumstance and gratitude? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. I care for him deeply, Mother, more deeply than I anticipated when this arrangement first began. But I fear that my feelings, however genuine, cannot erase the practical circumstances that brought us together in the first place. Circumstances that will always leave room for others to question my true motivations. Then perhaps, her mother said gently, you must decide whether you're willing to endure such questioning, for the sake of a connection you believe genuinely worthwhile. Elena's thoughts remained troubled throughout the following days, torn between her genuine feelings for Julian and her growing anxiety about the damage their association might cause to his reputation and standing within society. When Julian called upon her several days later, she found herself unable to fully mask her lingering concerns. You've been distant, Julian observed, as they sat together in her family's modest sitting room. Ever since the Harrington ball, something has weighed heavily on your thoughts. I worry about the rumors, Elena admitted finally. I worry that my association with you continues to invite unfair speculation about my motivations, and that this speculation might ultimately harm your standing, rather than help it. Exactly the opposite of what our original arrangement intended to accomplish. Elena, Julian said firmly, taking her hands in his own, I've told you before, and I'll tell you again as many times as necessary. I don't care what society whispers about our relationship. What matters to me is the genuine connection we've built together, not the opinions of people who understand nothing about either of us. But your family's legacy, your standing among your peers, Elena protested. Surely these things matter to you as well. They matter considerably less than your happiness, Julian said simply, and considerably less than my own happiness, which I haven't genuinely experienced in years until you walked into my life. Elena felt tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes at his heartfelt declaration, moved by the sincerity evident in every word he spoke. Before she could respond, however, a sharp knock interrupted their private moment, followed quickly by her father entering the room with an expression of considerable distress. Elena, Your Grace, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. I apologize for the interruption, but I've just received troubling news that requires immediate attention. What's happened, Father? Elena asked, rising quickly from her seat. It seems, her father said, that certain parties have begun circulating rumors questioning the legitimacy of our family's recent financial recovery, suggesting improper influence was used to secure certain business arrangements. Given the timing of these accusations, alongside the ongoing speculation about your relationship with the Duke, I fear we may be facing a rather serious scandal. Julian's expression darkened considerably at this news. What exactly are they suggesting? That I used my influence inappropriately to benefit the Whitmore family's business interests, Julian said grimly, understanding immediately the implications of such accusations, suggesting that our arrangement extends beyond simple personal affection into something considerably more inappropriate and potentially damaging to both our reputations. Can such rumors be addressed? Elena asked, alarm evident in her voice. They can be denied, Julian said, but denials rarely satisfy society's appetite for scandal once rumors have taken hold. I fear this situation requires more decisive action than simple denial. An important gathering, planned for the following week at Lord Camden's estate, suddenly took on considerably greater significance given these developments. The event, intended to celebrate several successful business partnerships throughout the season, now represented a crucial opportunity to either quell the growing scandal or watch it spiral further out of control. We must attend together, Julian said decisively, and we must present ourselves with absolute confidence and unity, allowing no room for further speculation about impropriety. Are you certain that's wise? Elena's father asked, clearly concerned about the potential risks involved. I'm certain it's necessary, Julian said firmly. Hiding from these accusations will only lend them further credibility. We must face them directly, together. In the days leading up to Lord Camden's gathering, Elena found herself increasingly anxious about the upcoming confrontation with society's harshest critics. She spent hours reviewing every interaction she'd shared with Julian, searching for any possible misstep that malicious gossips might twist into evidence, supporting their damaging accusations. "You're overthinking this," Julian reassured her, during one of their final meetings before the gathering. "We've done nothing improper, Elena. Our affection for one another is genuine, regardless of the practical circumstances that initially brought us together." "I know that," Elena said, "but knowing the truth doesn't guarantee others will believe it, especially when malicious rumors have already begun circulating so widely." "Then we simply demonstrate the truth through our actions," Julian said. "We attend Lord Camden's gathering with confidence and dignity, allowing our genuine connection to speak for itself, regardless of whatever cruel speculation others choose to entertain." Despite Julian's reassurances, Elena couldn't entirely shake her mounting anxiety as the evening of Lord Camden's gathering finally arrived. She dressed carefully, choosing an elegant gown that projected confidence and composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the silver locket Julian had given her weeks earlier, drawing strength from its familiar weight against her chest. When Julian arrived to escort her to the gathering, he studied her expression carefully, noting the tension evident despite her composed exterior. "You look beautiful," he said gently, "and considerably more nervous than the situation warrants." "I simply want tonight to go well," Elena admitted, "for both our sakes." "It will," Julian said, his confidence steady and reassuring. "We'll face this together, exactly as we've faced everything else since this remarkable friendship began." As their carriage approached Lord Camden's grand estate, Elena took a deep, steadying breath, gathering her courage for whatever challenges awaited them within. She had no way of knowing that the evening ahead would test not only society's perception of their relationship, but the very foundation of trust and affection that had grown so carefully between herself and Julian over the past several months. Lord Camden's estate glittered with hundreds of candles when Elena and Julian arrived, the grand hall filled with society's most prominent families, all gathered to celebrate the season's successful business ventures. Elena felt the weight of countless eyes upon them the moment they entered, conversations quieting noticeably as guests noticed their arrival together. "Stay close to me," Julian murmured, offering his arm as they made their way through the crowded entrance hall. "I don't intend to go anywhere else," Elena replied, forcing confidence into her voice, despite the nervous flutter in her chest. They moved through the gathering with practiced composure, greeting acquaintances and exchanging pleasantries, though Elena couldn't ignore the undercurrent of curious speculation following their every interaction. Several guests offered warm, genuine greetings, clearly unaffected by the circulating rumors, while others regarded them with barely concealed skepticism, their polite words carrying subtle edges of doubt. Halfway through the evening, Lord Beaumont, husband to the woman who had confronted Elena at the previous gathering, approached with a group of similarly skeptical gentlemen, his expression carrying obvious challenge. "Your Grace," Lord Beaumont said, his tone deceptively polite, "I understand certain concerns have arisen regarding the propriety of your business dealings with the Whitmore family. Perhaps you'd care to address these concerns directly, given how publicly you've associated yourself with Miss Whitmore this evening." The surrounding conversations quieted noticeably, guests turning to observe the exchange with obvious interest. Elena felt her heart racing, uncertain how Julian would respond to such a direct, public challenge. "I'm happy to address any concerns directly, Lord Beaumont," Julian said, his voice carrying calm, measured authority that immediately commanded attention. "Miss Whitmore and I began our acquaintance under circumstances that some might consider unusual, but I assure you, nothing improper has ever characterized our relationship." "And yet," Lord Beaumont pressed, "her family's financial recovery coincided rather remarkably with the beginning of your acquaintance. One might reasonably question whether improper influence played a role in these developments." "One might question many things," Julian replied evenly, "though questioning without evidence rarely serves truth particularly well. I offered assistance to the Whitmore family because I valued Miss Whitmore's genuine friendship, freely given, without any expectation of financial benefit on her part. If offering assistance to someone I care for constitutes impropriety, then I confess myself guilty of exactly that, and nothing more." Murmurs rippled through the surrounding crowd at Julian's firm, confident response, several guests nodding approvingly at his direct handling of Lord Beaumont's pointed challenge. However, Lord Beaumont seemed unwilling to concede so easily. Perhaps, he continued, Miss Whitmore might address these concerns herself, given that her own motivations remain the primary subject of society's curiosity. All eyes turned expectantly toward Elena, and she felt the full weight of the gathered crowd's scrutiny pressing upon her. She took a steadying breath, drawing strength from the reassuring warmth of Julian's presence beside her. I understand society's curiosity regarding my relationship with the Duke, Elena said, her voice steadier than she anticipated. Our friendship began unexpectedly, born from circumstances neither of us initially planned. But I assure everyone gathered here tonight, my affection for the Duke has never been motivated by financial considerations, nor has his generosity toward my family ever been contingent upon anything beyond genuine friendship and mutual respect. A convenient explanation, Lord Beaumont said skeptically, though difficult to verify given the private nature of your arrangement. Perhaps, Elena said, feeling emboldened despite her nervousness. Rather than questioning motivations you cannot possibly verify through speculation alone, you might simply observe the genuine warmth and respect the Duke and I share whenever we're together. Actions, I believe, speak considerably louder than unfounded accusations. A brief silence followed her words before Lady Camden, their hostess, stepped forward, with obvious approval evident in her expression. Well spoken, Miss Whitmore. I confess I've watched your friendship with the Duke develop these past months, and I've witnessed nothing but genuine affection and mutual respect between you both. I find these accusations considerably overblown, given what I've personally observed. Several other guests voiced similar sentiments, gradually shifting the crowd's mood away from suspicious skepticism toward more sympathetic understanding. Lord Beaumont, sensing the shifting tide of public opinion, offered a stiff, unconvinced nod before retreating with his companions toward another corner of the gathering. You handled that remarkably well, Julian murmured to Elena once the immediate crowd had dispersed somewhat. I simply spoke the truth, Elena said, though relief was evident in her voice now that the confrontation had passed. However, their relief proved premature. Later that evening, as guests gathered for a formal dinner, a commotion arose near the entrance hall, drawing widespread attention. Elena's father appeared, his expression frantic, accompanied by an unfamiliar gentleman, carrying official-looking documents. Elena, Your Grace, her father said urgently, I apologize for this interruption, but a matter of considerable urgency requires immediate attention. What's happened? Julian asked, already moving toward Elena's father with obvious concern. This gentleman represents certain creditors who claim additional debts remain outstanding from my earlier financial difficulties, her father explained, clearly distressed. They've arrived tonight, of all times, threatening legal action if these debts aren't addressed immediately. Elena felt her stomach drop with dread. Understanding immediately the timing of this development seemed deliberately calculated to maximize public embarrassment, likely orchestrated by those seeking to discredit her family, and, by extension, Julian's association with them. This is clearly an attempt to further damage our reputation, Julian said grimly, studying the documents the creditor's representative presented. These debts appear considerably inflated, beyond what any legitimate claim would suggest. Regardless of their legitimacy, the representative said stiffly, my clients demand immediate resolution, or they shall be forced to pursue public legal action, further exposing this family's financial improprieties. The surrounding guests had gathered closer, whispering amongst themselves as they witnessed this humiliating public confrontation unfold. Elena felt tears of frustration and embarrassment threatening, though she fought desperately to maintain her composure despite the mounting crisis. Julian, however, remained remarkably calm despite the escalating tension. I shall personally review these claims immediately, he announced firmly, and if any legitimate debts remain outstanding, I shall ensure they're addressed appropriately. However, I strongly suspect these claims have been deliberately exaggerated and poorly timed, specifically to embarrass the Whitmore family in a public setting. Your Grace, the representative said, clearly unsettled by Julian's confident intervention. Surely this matter doesn't concern you directly. It concerns me a great deal, Julian said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority and protective determination. Miss Whitmore and her family are dear to me, and I won't stand idly by while unfounded, exaggerated claims are used as weapons to publicly humiliate them. The representative, clearly uncomfortable under Julian's direct scrutiny and the weight of Julian's considerable influence, hastily agreed to allow Julian's solicitors to review the claims privately, rather than pursuing immediate public legal action. As the crisis gradually diffused, Elena felt overwhelming gratitude toward Julian, moved deeply by his unwavering support during such a humiliating public ordeal. "Thank you," she whispered, once the immediate danger had passed and guests had begun returning to their interrupted dinner preparations. "You needn't thank me," Julian said gently, taking her hand in his own despite the curious eyes still watching them closely. "I told you before, Elena, your happiness and your family's well-being matter to me more than anything society might whisper about our relationship." Elena studied Julian's determined expression, understanding suddenly and completely that whatever had begun as a simple, practical arrangement had transformed into something far more profound, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect, protection, and deepening affection that neither society's cruel gossip nor manufactured scandals could ever hope to diminish. In the days following Lord Camden's gathering, Julian moved swiftly to resolve the manufactured debt claims, his solicitors quickly uncovering evidence that the accusations had indeed been grossly exaggerated, orchestrated by a rival business associate seeking to damage both the Whitmore family's reputation and, by association, Julian's growing public standing. Once the truth came to light, the fabricated scandal collapsed entirely, leaving Elena's family's reputation not only restored, but strengthened by the widespread sympathy their unjust treatment had generated throughout society. Elena found herself increasingly grateful for Julian's steadfast support throughout the ordeal, though the experience had left her contemplating more seriously the depth and permanence of their growing relationship. One quiet afternoon, several days after the crisis had fully resolved, Julian called upon her unexpectedly, his expression carrying a seriousness she hadn't witnessed before. "Elena," he said, as they settled into the familiar comfort of her family's sitting room, "I've been thinking a great deal about everything we've experienced together these past months, and I find myself needing to share something important with you." "Of course," Elena said, noting the unusual gravity in his tone. "What's troubling you?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts carefully before speaking. "When I first asked you to help restore my social standing, I convinced myself the request was purely practical, a simple business arrangement that would benefit us both without complicating matters unnecessarily. But I think, even then, some part of me recognized that I wanted considerably more than simple assistance."
"What do you mean?" Elena asked softly. "I mean," Julian continued, "that from our very first conversation, something about your honesty, your genuine warmth, drew me in ways I hadn't experienced in years."
"I asked you to accompany me to social gatherings, not simply to repair my reputation, but because I desperately wanted an excuse to remain near you, to continue experiencing the genuine connection I felt building between us." Elena's breath caught at his heartfelt admission, understanding suddenly the deeper truth behind their unusual arrangement's origins. "Julian, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted, vulnerability evident in his voice. "Afraid that admitting such feelings too quickly might frighten you away, or worse, might trap you into an arrangement you felt obligated to honor rather than genuinely desired. I've lost everyone I've ever loved, Elena. My father, my mother, both taken far too soon. I couldn't bear the thought of pursuing you too aggressively, only to lose you as well, whether through rejection or through some cruel twist of fate beyond my control." "Julian," Elena said gently, moving closer to take his hands in her own. "I understand that fear intimately, perhaps more than you realize. I've watched my family's fortunes crumble and rebuild, watched relationships I trusted prove hollow and self-serving. I understand the fear of losing something precious before you've even had the chance to fully embrace it. Then you understand why I've hesitated to speak more directly about my feelings," Julian said. "Though after everything we've endured together these past weeks, the scandal, the public scrutiny, your family's crisis, I find myself unable to continue hesitating any longer." "What are you saying, Julian?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer building within his careful words. "I'm saying," Julian said, his voice steady despite the evident vulnerability in his expression, "that I love you, Elena. Completely, genuinely, without any remaining pretense of practical arrangement or convenient benefit. I love your honesty, your courage, your unwavering loyalty to those you care about. I love the way you've helped me remember what it feels like to genuinely live again, rather than simply exist behind carefully constructed walls of grief and isolation." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes at his heartfelt declaration, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion evident in every word he spoke. "Julian," she said softly, "I love you too. I think I have for quite some time now, though I've been equally hesitant to fully acknowledge these feelings, given how unusual our circumstances have been from the very beginning." "Then we needn't hesitate any longer," Julian said, hope and relief flooding his expression as he reached to gently cup her face in his hands. "Elena, these past months have transformed my entire existence. You've taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that genuine connection is worth the risk of potential loss, that love, however frightening, remains infinitely preferable to the empty safety of isolation. You've taught me equally valuable lessons," Elena said, smiling through her happy tears. "You've shown me that true strength often lies in quiet steadfastness rather than loud declarations, that genuine kindness can exist even beneath the most carefully guarded exteriors." They sat together for a long moment, simply enjoying the warmth of their mutual confession. The weight of unspoken fears finally lifted from between them. Eventually, Julian spoke again, his tone carrying renewed determination. "Elena, I know we've discussed the practical origins of our arrangement extensively, but I find myself wanting considerably more than simply continuing our current understanding. I want a genuine future together, built on this love we've discovered, rather than the convenient business arrangement that first brought us together." "What are you suggesting?" Elena asked, though hope was already blooming brightly within her chest. "I'm suggesting," Julian said, his eyes carrying unmistakable sincerity, "that we consider a future together that extends far beyond simple friendship or convenient social arrangement. I want to build a genuine life with you, Elena, one filled with the warmth, honesty, and connection we've discovered together these past months." Elena felt overwhelming joy flooding through her at his heartfelt words, understanding that whatever challenges society might continue presenting, whatever scandals or skeptical whispers might arise in the future, she and Julian had built something genuine and lasting between them, something considerably stronger than any external challenge could hope to diminish. "I would like that very much," Elena said softly, her heart full with happiness she hadn't dared imagine possible when their unusual arrangement first began months earlier. Julian's expression brightened considerably at her response, relief and joy mingling openly across his features. "Then perhaps," he said, "we should discuss how best to proceed, given the considerable interest society continues showing in our relationship." "Perhaps," Elena agreed, laughing softly at the thought of Lady Beaumont's reaction to whatever announcement might eventually follow their heartfelt conversation. "Though I suspect, given everything we've already endured together, we're more than capable of facing whatever challenges society might present in the future." "I have no doubt of that," Julian said, drawing her closer with quiet, contented affection. "Together, I believe we're capable of facing anything life chooses to present, Elena. I've never felt more certain of anything in my entire life." As they sat together that afternoon, discussing their shared future with growing excitement and anticipation, Elena reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them together, beginning with nothing more than a simple dare among friends, evolving gradually into genuine friendship, and ultimately blossoming into a love considerably deeper and more meaningful than either of them could have possibly anticipated when their unusual arrangement first began. Word of Julian and Elena's genuine feelings for one another spread quickly through society, once Julian requested a private meeting with Elena's father, seeking formal permission to court her properly, without the practical pretense that had characterized their earlier arrangement. Her father, having witnessed firsthand Julian's unwavering support during their family's recent crisis, readily granted his blessing, relief, and happiness evident in his tired but hopeful expression. "I couldn't have wished for a more devoted match for my daughter," he told Julian warmly, shaking his hand with genuine gratitude. "You've proven yourself considerably more than simply a generous benefactor, Your Grace. You've shown genuine character and steadfast loyalty throughout everything our family has endured these past months. Elena has shown me equally remarkable character, Julian replied sincerely. I consider myself fortunate beyond measure to have earned her affection, and I promise you, sir, I shall dedicate myself entirely to her happiness and well-being for the remainder of our lives together. With her father's blessing secured, Julian began planning a formal announcement of their engagement, choosing to host a grand gathering at Ashworth House itself, transforming the once cold and lonely estate into a warm, welcoming space, filled with laughter and celebration, for the first time in years. As preparations for the announcement gathering progressed, Elena found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation both she and Julian had experienced throughout their unusual journey together. The cold, distant Duke society had once feared and avoided had become someone entirely different, warm and engaged, genuinely connected to those around him, in ways that would have seemed impossible when their acquaintance first began. I scarcely recognize this house, Margaret remarked, visiting Elena at Ashworth House as final preparations for the engagement announcement neared completion. It feels considerably more alive than I remember from previous visits. Julian says the same thing, Elena said, smiling as she surveyed the beautifully decorated hall, fresh flowers arranged throughout every corner, warm candlelight replacing the cold, sparse illumination that had once characterized the grand estate. He says the house simply needed genuine happiness to fill its rooms once again. And you've certainly provided that happiness, Charlotte added, joining their conversation with obvious delight. Elena, I confess, when we first dared you to approach him all those months ago, none of us imagined it might lead to something so genuinely wonderful. Neither did I, Elena admitted, laughing softly at the memory of that fateful evening when a simple dare had unexpectedly changed the entire course of her life. Though I suppose sometimes the most meaningful connections arise from the most unexpected beginnings. On the evening of the engagement announcement, Ashworth House glowed warmly, with candlelight, guests arriving in steady succession, eager to witness the formal culmination of a romance that had captivated society's attention for months. Elena dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing an elegant gown in soft gold that complemented the silver locket Julian had given her, now a cherished symbol of their journey together. When she descended the grand staircase, she found Julian waiting at the bottom, his expression filled with unmistakable love and admiration as he watched her graceful descent. You look absolutely radiant, he said softly, taking her hand as she reached the final step. You look rather handsome yourself, Elena replied, smiling warmly as she studied his genuine, unguarded happiness, so different from the careful, distant composure he had maintained when their acquaintance first began. Together, they entered the grand ballroom where their guests had gathered, warm applause and genuine well-wishes greeting their arrival. Julian guided Elena to the center of the room, and as the assembled crowd quieted expectantly, he turned to address them directly. Friends, he began, his voice carrying confident warmth throughout the room. Many of you have watched our unusual friendship develop these past months with considerable curiosity, and I understand entirely why our beginning might have seemed peculiar to outside observers. I asked Elena to help restore my social standing through a simple, practical arrangement, never anticipating that this request would lead me toward the greatest happiness I've ever experienced. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered crowd as Julian continued, his eyes never leaving Elena's face as he spoke. Elena Whitmore taught me that genuine connection requires vulnerability, that true strength lies not in guarded isolation, but in the courage to open oneself fully to love, despite the inherent risks such openness carries. She has transformed not only my public standing, but my entire understanding of what genuine happiness truly means. Julian turned fully toward Elena, taking both her hands in his own as he continued, his voice filled with quiet, heartfelt sincerity. Elena, from the moment you approached me at that first gathering, unafraid and refreshingly honest, I knew you were unlike anyone I had ever encountered. You've given me laughter after years of silence, warmth after years of cold isolation, and genuine love after years of believing myself incapable of experiencing such profound connection again. I would be honored beyond measure if you would agree to become my wife, to share the remainder of our lives together, building genuine happiness from what began as nothing more than an unexpected dare. Elena felt tears of joy gathering as she looked into Julian's hopeful, loving expression, understanding completely the remarkable journey that had brought them to this precise moment. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with genuine happiness and certainty. "Yes, Julian, I would be honored to become your wife." The gathered crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause and joyful celebration as Julian drew Elena into a warm, loving embrace, sealing their engagement with a tender kiss that spoke volumes about the genuine affection they had discovered together. Margaret and Charlotte, watching from nearby with tears of happiness in their own eyes, exchanged delighted glances, remembering fondly the playful dare that had unexpectedly set this remarkable love story into motion. As the celebration continued late into the evening, filled with music, laughter, and genuine warmth throughout Ashworth House's previously cold and silent halls, Elena found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation both she and Julian had experienced together. What had begun as a simple social wager among friends had blossomed into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and profound love that neither society's skepticism nor manufactured scandal could ever hope to diminish. Later that evening, as the celebration finally began winding down, Julian led Elena onto the quiet terrace overlooking the moonlit gardens, away from the joyful noise of their gathered guests. "Do you remember?" he asked softly, drawing her close against him beneath the starlit sky, "when I first asked you to help me, all those months ago? I never could have imagined this moment awaited us, when I first requested that favor." "Neither could I," Elena admitted, resting her head contentedly against his shoulder, "though I confess, some part of me suspected our connection might become something more significant than simple friendship, even from that very first conversation." "What made you suspect that?" Julian asked curiously. "You laughed," Elena said simply, a genuine, surprised laugh that seemed to catch even you off guard. "I think, somehow, I knew in that moment that our story was only just beginning." Julian smiled warmly, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead as they stood together beneath the peaceful night sky. "Then I suppose we have that ridiculous dare to thank for everything we've built together since." Perhaps we do," Elena said, laughing softly at the delightful irony of their unusual beginning. "Though I like to think we would have found our way toward each other eventually, regardless of how our story began." "I believe that too," Julian said softly, holding her close as the stars twinkled brightly above them. "Some connections, I think, are simply meant to be, regardless of the unexpected paths that bring two people together." As they stood together on that quiet terrace, wrapped in genuine love and quiet contentment, both Elena and Julian understood clearly that their unusual beginning, born from nothing more than a playful dare among friends, had ultimately led them toward a love considerably more profound and lasting than either of them could have possibly imagined when their remarkable journey first began. And so, beneath that peaceful, star-filled sky, two hearts that had once been guarded by fear and circumstance finally found their way toward genuine, lasting happiness together, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead toward the most beautiful, enduring love stories of all. Nu, Stor, Ad Ve Du.